Self-clarity is difficult to obtain, and not for the faint of heart. Moving beyond the surface level and into the recesses of our soul is a terrifying journey. We're scared of what we will find and scared of who or what might be down there. Jesus tells us that knowing Him and walking with Him will lead to truth, and that truth will set us free. John 8:31-32. However, we believe if we discover the truth about ourselves, we'll be swallowed by shame and humiliation. To desire self-clarity is to risk seeing ourselves not for who we want to be, but for who we really are. It's easier to stay asleep to the truth. Self-clarity wakes us up. At the time I was sitting in that cold room on the 3rd floor, other areas of my life weren't going well either. My marriage was unhappy. I was consistently overwhelmed and aggravated as a new parent. The nonprofit where I worked was on the verge of bankruptcy. To top it off, our ministry spent days publicly telling people about the love of Jesus while privately bickering and mistrusting each other. I was burned out, and my relationship with God was on autopilot. Relational trust and intimacy were at an all-time low in my life. But I wasn't the only one who was affected. My wife felt unsupported by me. My kids felt nervous around me because of my temper. My coworkers felt frustrated by my incessant need to reinvent the wheel and innovate even when it wasn't necessary. And I was blind to all of it. I saw everyone else as the problem. But as it turns out, I was playing a much bigger role than I wanted to admit. There's a question that humanity has been wrestling with since the dawn of time. What is the purpose of life? If I could be so bold, I would like to humbly submit my answer. The purpose of life is relationships. The phrase one another occurs 100 times in the New Testament. Almost 60 of those occurrences are commands about how we relate to one another. Examples from this lengthy list include callings to love one another, be devoted to one another, and care for one another. In other words, God's great desire for you is to love and be loved. However, we have a problem, a relational problem. Let me illustrate. What do you think is the number one cause of missionaries leaving the field? If you're like me, you likely assume it's due to issues like persecution, lack of funding, or even illness. As it turns out, none of those are correct. The number one reason Christians leave the mission field is conflict with other Christians. That's right. Sometimes even spiritual superheroes want to break someone's nose. But this isn't just a problem in the mission field. I'd venture to say that this is also the reason Christians leave marriages, leave churches, and leave friendships. Often the problem is not the world. The problem is us. We don't know how to do relationships. This is especially tragic for us as Christians because if you ask anyone with basic Bible knowledge, they'll tell you that the scriptures can be summarized by Jesus' words in the Gospel of Matthew. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus tells us that all of life is about loving and being loved in relationships. Richard Rohr once wrote, "How we relate to God always reveals how we will relate to people. And how we relate to people is an almost infallible indicator of how we relate to God and let God relate to us. The whole Bible is a school of relationship." Did you catch that? How we relate is how we relate. Each of us has a relational style, our one way that we approach doing relationships, and we apply it to everyone, even God. This is why the scriptures tell us that we can't love God if we don't love others, and that when we love others, we also love God. Matthew 25:31-46, 1 John 4:7-8. It's why we're told in Mark 12 to love your neighbor as yourself, verse 31. How we relate is how we relate. This is why understanding our style of relating is critical. Sitting in that cold room, I looked around and realized I needed better relationships. I was desperate. I was willing to do whatever was necessary.